Welcome back to the channel. This week's video is all about getting ESLint and Prettier working together in Visual Studio Code. We'll also be looking at installing a JavaScript style standard. For this video, you'll have to have the latest version of Visual Studio Code installed. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to install Prettier and ESLint VSCode plugins. You'll be able to install the required packages locally in a project. You'll be configuring ESLint to ignore formatting, which is handled by Prettier. You'll be configuring single and double quotes for different file formats, and you'll be able to create NPM scripts to automate formatting, checking, and linting. As many of my viewers also use Hugo, you should check out my video on configuring Prettier to work with Hugo. I've left a link above and below in the description for that video. Before we start, a quick message from this video's sponsor. As a Skillshare teacher, I've partnered up with them to offer you a free 1-month trial using my link below. I personally produce full-length Hugo courses on Skillshare on a variety of topics, and there are many other great teachers on Skillshare ready to help you level up your skills for your next big project. Click on the link below for the 1-month free trial. You can cancel at any time and you'll be helping out this channel. So when you've got Visual Studio Code open, it could be a new project or a project that you're already working on. You'll have to go to the extensions button on the left and then search for ESLint. And the first one that comes up with the orange logo, it has 21 million downloads. That is the official plugin which you need to install. You've also got to search for Prettier. And the first plugin that's got 22 million downloads, you'll have to download that one as well. We then need to do some configuration with Visual Studio Code. You can use Control or Command with comma, or you can go to File, Preferences, and Settings. You have to type in Formatter. And for the default formatter, you'll have to choose Prettier. That way, Visual Studio Code will assign Prettier to format all the file types which it supports. You then got to search for Format. And these are two optional configurations. The first one is Format on Paste. Whenever you paste in code, it will mean Prettier will format it for you automatically. And the other one is Format on Save. And whenever you hit the Save button, your code will be formatted for you. They can be a little bit restrictive, but at the same time, they can save you a lot of time because you have to use Alt-Shift-F to format otherwise. Now we need to install the required packages locally. We'll open up a new terminal and we'll run npm init. The first option is the actual name of your project, and it will take that from the folder, and you can hit enter to accept the default. I'm not worried about all the other options at the moment, as they're mainly geared towards people who are uploading projects to the npm registry. You can open up your package.json file and you'll see the defaults that have been created. Let's now install some packages. We'll use the command npm install --save-dev, and the shortcut is npm I and then -D. The capital D or save dev is all about saving your dependencies as development dependencies. That means they're not required to actually run the program, and they won't be downloaded if that's the reason why you are installing npm dependencies. First package we need is Prettier. So we'll install that separately. To create our ESLint config file, we're going to run npx ESLint --init. We then asked a series of questions. First question is, how would you like to use ESLint? And we're going to use it to enforce code style. Then it says, what kind of modules are you using? Now, you're more than likely using JavaScript modules if you're going to be importing or exporting. If you're creating JavaScript for node.js, you'll be using common.js. But we're going to be using JavaScript modules. We're not going to be using React or Vue, so we're not using any of those frameworks. And in my particular case, I'm not using TypeScript, but if you are, you have to select yes. And you're more than likely going to be running your code in a browser if you're doing web design, or if you're generating a Node module, you'll be choosing Node. And would you like to define a style guide? You can either answer questions to generate a custom one, but I do recommend you use a popular style guide. Now the main three are Airbnb, Standard.js, and Google. I recommend you have a good read up on the three and decide which one's best for you. I'm going to be using Airbnb. And I'm going to use JSON as the config file format. It's now going to be installing all of the dependencies for us. I'm going to be using npm, as that's the default package manager for node.js, unless you have a different one installed on your system. So have a look in your package.json file. You'll see that we've personally installed ESLint and ESLint config Prettier. And now we've got the ESLint config Airbnb base and the import plugin installed. So open up the .eslint rc.json file that was created for you. This is the configuration file for ESLint. Currently it's extending Airbnb base. We've also got to extend Prettier. So we'll put in some double quotes after a comma, and we'll type in Prettier, and that will pull the information from the plugin that we've already installed. Something really important is that we tell ESLint that if we set root true, ESLint will not look any higher in the directory structure for a config file, and that means we're not going to be inheriting any other configs, any global configs. Telling ESLint that this is the only config file, the highest config file that we're going to use. Next thing we'll do is we'll put in some ignore patterns. Now you could set up a .eslint ignore file. I think it's much easier to set up your ignore patterns directly in your config. So we'll put in an array with some square brackets. First thing we need to ignore is node modules, node_modules. It's actually ignored by default, but once you set up ignore patterns or a ignore file, you then have to set things up from scratch. Then put a comma in, double quotes. I'm setting this project up personally for Hugo, so I'm going to ignore the public folder. That's the output when you compile a site. And I'm also going to ignore the resources folder. You've got to set it up specific for your project, and that's why we've got our config file here inside the project. So we'll save that. For this project, we've got the Airbnb style guide installed, and the Airbnb style guide enforces single quotes. And by default, Prettier will be formatting our code with double quotes. So here's how we'll configure it. We'll make a new file, and it's .prettier rc.json, and we'll put in the rule of single quotes. By default it's false. We're going to change that to true. So now all our quotes will be converted to single. However, you will find that if you're working with HTML files, CSS or SCSS files or SASS, you will want double quotes. So here's what we'll do to change the rule for those files. I'm going to put in a rule of overrides. Put in a new object, and the commit will be files. Put in an array, comma, and then options. So for files, we're looking at star.html, star.css, with comma, and double quotes, star.scss, comma, and then some double quotes, star.sass, comma, double quotes, star.less. And the option we'll use is copy and paste single quotes true, and we'll change it to false. Make sure you put a comma after your initial single quote rule. So we'll save that, and we've set up our exception to the single quotes rule. Also need to set up ignore files for Prettier, so .prettier ignore. And this depends on your project. Generally speaking, you'd want to ignore any files which are outputted when you compile your project. So for example, I'm using Hugo, so I'm going to ignore /public /* and /resources /*. node modules is ignored by default. And we've got here, that's just for my particular project that I'm working on at the moment, but you've got to work out which files do you want Prettier to not touch. So I'll save that. So let's run some tests and then we'll create some scripts to automate the process. So we'll create a test.html and we'll put in exclamation and tab, and that will create a basic HTML skeleton structure for us. I'm going to change my quotes around the language to single quotes, and then I'll use Alt-Shift-F to format, and you'll notice that it changes to double quotes and also adjusts the tab indentation for me. So that's working just as we want it to. Then we'll create a test.js and we'll do import test from, and we'll use double quotes, test module.js. And then instead of running test like so, what we'll do is we'll run, for example, test mod. We'll then open up the errors down the bottom. We've got the X and the exclamation. So let's have a look. We've got a bunch of errors happening here. The first lot of errors is because it can't find the actual module because it doesn't exist, and it's not too sure why we're using a .js extension for a JavaScript file when we're importing. And the last one is saying the actual test mod isn't defined because we've only got test up there. So the first step is if we use Alt-Shift-F, Prettier will change the double quotes to single quotes for us, and it will insert some semicolons at the end of each statement. But that hasn't fixed the syntactical errors, and that's where ESLint comes in. So let's create a script that can do this for us automatically. Right, and that's the exact same as fix, but for Prettier, and then a space and a dot. Make sure you've got a comma after your first command. Then we can link them both together. We'll just call that lint, and put a comma in before we do it, and that will be npm run lint :ESLint, and for sequential, npm run lint :Prettier. And we'll put that at the top of our list. So we'll cut it, paste at the top, have to add a comma and remove the trailing comma. You can do Alt-Control-F if you want to format the file, and we'll save that. Before we continue, we'll use Control-Z to revert the changes that Prettier made to the file. You'll have to disable format on save if you wish to save it without any formatting. We'll then go through to our scripts. Now we'll run the combination lint script for both ESLint and Prettier, and we'll see what things can be fixed and what can't be fixed. Hit the play button. So it's gone through. The first thing it's done is ESLint. It didn't actually get into the Prettier stage. So it's unable to fix the problems. Let's go through and fix them ourselves. So we're running a function that doesn't exist. What we'll do is we'll just start fresh because it's not possible to import something that doesn't exist. So we'll create a function. So we'll do const test mod. We'll just put a comment in there, and then we'll run the function. We'll leave the colon off. We'll create some bad formatting. We'll save that, and we'll rerun. So we'll just scroll up. ESLint has run through there and it's got no feedback at all because it was totally happy with everything we did. And then Prettier's gone through, and Prettier will feed back with the amount of time it spent on every file. And you can see Prettier has fixed up the indentation, and it's also put in semicolons at the end of statements. So that's it for this week's video. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below in the comment section. Please remember to hit the thumbs up if you like the video, and subscribe and hit the bell notification to get weekly notifications of my videos. I'll see you in the next one.